Today's notes are on types of quadrilaterals. We defined quadrilateral in our last class. We said that it was any four-sided polygon. This is 5-2. And we also talked about parallelograms and talked about the properties of parallelograms. I'm going to remind you of a parallelogram. A parallelogram, as we defined last class, is a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides. And I'll draw a picture of a parallelogram. So it's a quadrilateral, meaning it has four sides, and it has two pairs of parallel sides. So the top and the bottom, let's say, are parallel, and the left and the right side are parallel. And that is the simple definition of a parallelogram. The next special type of quadrilateral we're going to talk about is a rectangle. So a rectangle also has a very simple definition. It is a quadrilateral with four congruent angles. And a quadrilateral means it has four angles. I know that any quadrilateral sums up to 360 degrees, so I actually know what those angles are. Not only are they congruent, but they are all 90 degrees. So in addition to it having four congruent angles, we also know that they are actually four 90-degree angles. And that's the definition of a rectangle. So make sure you write the definition and draw the picture. All right, our next is a rhombus. So a rhombus is a quadrilateral with four congruent sides. Notice I didn't say anything about the angles for a rhombus, because all that we know for a rhombus is that it is a quadrilateral, so four sides, and I'm going to try to make mine look like all the sides are the same with tick marks on all of the sides. That is a rhombus. All right, so a square is a very special shape because a square is, you can kind of think of it as like a combo of a rectangle and a rhombus. It has both of those properties. So a square is a quadrilateral with four congruent angles and four congruent sides. So a square is a very special shape. It has both properties of a rectangle and a rhombus. So let's draw a square. We all know what they look like. Do your best. Four congruent sides. All the sides are congruent. And also all of the angles are congruent, meaning all the angles are 90 degrees. So four congruent sides, four congruent angles. All right, let's move on to the next group of quadrilaterals. And I'm actually going to put like a line here because we'll see later that these are a little bit different. The next one is a trapezoid. And I think most of these words are probably familiar to you guys. So a trapezoid is a quadrilateral with exactly one pair of parallel sides. So what's important here is that a trapezoid is not a parallelogram, right? A parallelogram has two pairs of parallel sides. A trapezoid only has one. So let's draw some pictures of trapezoids. So the classic trapezoid I know you guys are familiar with is when like the top and the bottom are parallel like that, and then you have two sides that look like that. That is like the classic trapezoid that I think we could all recognize. But I want you to get in the habit of recognizing trapezoids that look different. So here's a trapezoid kind of like standing on its side. So I'm going to draw kind of like almost like I'm drawing a rectangle, but only one pair of sides are parallel. And it's important to recognize that this is also a trapezoid, that second one I drew. It doesn't have to look like the classic trapezoid. All right, so there's another type of trapezoid as well. It's a special trapezoid. It's called an isosceles trapezoid. And an isosceles trapezoid is a trapezoid, abbreviating that. It's a trap with the non-parallel sides congruent. So let's draw a picture of this. Let's draw our classic trapezoid. Top and the bottom are parallel. And then these sides I'm drawing are the non-parallel sides. If this trapezoid is isosceles, those sides are parallel. Or sorry, congruent. And I'm gonna actually put some more vocab in here. We often call these the legs. That's a leg, that's a leg. Just like an isosceles triangle, which we talked about last unit. This is a base, and this is a base. So an isosceles trapezoid has two bases and two legs. All right, so we only have one more shape, and that's our last quadrilateral. I'm gonna put a line here because this one's also a little bit different. It's called a kite. And a kite is a shape we are all familiar with because we've seen them flying in the sky. It's a quadrilateral with two adjacent, we know that word from earlier in this unit, two adjacent congruent side pairs. So many words. Two adjacent congruent side pairs. So let's draw a kite, the classic kite that we see like in the sky flying. Let's decode this. So two adjacent, that means next to. So two sides that are next to each other are congruent. So these two sides are congruent, and also those two sides are congruent. That is a kite. So the last thing we're gonna do is put all of these vocab words together. And this is very, very important. This is called the quadrilateral family tree. All these quadrilaterals are, you could say they are related to each other because they're quadrilaterals, the ones that we just defined, but some of them are related more than others. So we're gonna draw a family tree, just like you guys would draw a family tree of your own family. So at the top is quadrilateral. Remember, quadrilateral just means any four-sided shape. That's the only definition, four sides. And quadrilaterals, there are a few different types. So if you're quadrilateral, you could be a trapezoid. That's one type. You could be a parallelogram. That's another type. I would argue that that's the really special type. Or you could be a kite. Now, let's talk about what goes underneath these shapes. So just like in a family tree, what goes underneath it, so let's say the trapezoid is like a parent, right? What goes underneath the trapezoid has all of the properties of the trapezoid. So underneath the trapezoid is a special type of trapezoid. It's called an isosceles trapezoid. All right, let's talk about what goes underneath the parallelogram. Remember, parallelograms have parallel sides. So we have a couple different types of parallelograms. We have rectangles. That's one type. We have rhombuses. That's another type. And the last type is a square, but I'm going to put the square someplace special because a square has all of the properties of a rectangle and all of the properties of a rhombus. So a square is going to go underneath all of those shapes. And remember, a kite, the definition of a kite is that it has two pairs of adjacent parallel sides. So the kite has something special going on. A kite sometimes, if it's really special, can be a rhombus. We're just going to draw a line right there. All right, so I'm going to put a couple examples here how to use the quadrilateral family tree. Okay, so we're going to put a couple examples and we'll talk about how to use it. So our answers, answer the following as always, sometimes, or never true. Okay? So let's do part A. A square is a rectangle. Okay, so let's find a square, right? Here's our square. And I want to know if a square is a rectangle, right? So square is underneath rectangle. And what that means is that it has all of the properties of a rectangle. And if it's underneath a rectangle, that means that it is always a rectangle. All right, let's do another one. A parallelogram is a rhombus. All right, so let's find parallelogram. So parallelogram is here. I know that parallelogram is a quadrilateral, always, no matter what, because it's underneath it. But a parallelogram can sometimes be a rectangle, can sometimes be a rhombus, and can sometimes be a square. So a parallelogram is a rhombus. That is sometimes. Because sometimes it will be other shapes. Okay, lastly, a trapezoid is a rectangle. And let's find trapezoid. So trapezoid is right here. A trapezoid is always a quadrilateral. It's underneath quadrilateral. But the only other relationship a trapezoid has is sometimes it's isosceles trapezoid. It has no relation to a rectangle. So this one would be never. All right, so you guys have a couple things to do to practice. On Canvas, you can practice. There is a 5-2 quizzes. And you also have homework 5-2 that you can do to practice.